All right, Harry, the Bible is a big book. As we see here, it's quite thick, right? There's 66 miniature books inside of this one book here. It could be very confusing to a lot of people. Where do we spend most of our time reading?
Okay, that's a good question because at different stages of our Christian walk, if we're thinking about the Christian faith, where everything is new and we don't even understand and not even sure how this works, I'd really suggest one of the simple gospels, like Luke is actually one of the simplest because it more the life of Jesus, the story of his life. It gives us all the teaching, but it's really detailed about the person of Jesus, and we hope that if people fall in love with the person of Jesus, they'll also fall in love with the Savior Jesus.
Hmm.
And then after a while, if they do accept the faith and want to walk with God, then I would still focus on the Gospels because it as a Christian, what we're doing is we're looking for Jesus. Jesus is the answer, the only ladder to heaven. And if we so all four Gospels are they all bring us
Like we can really see Jesus in those four gospels.
and that is really the only answer we're looking for to start with when we're young in the faith. Just go through the gospels. Eventually, if you've been a Christian for a year or 6 months or a year, whenever you want to reach for something else, then obviously the book of Acts is really important because that tells us, but gives us the details as to what the early church did with those gospels.
Hmm.
So as Paul goes out preaching and so we see the early church and how that develops. And then after that, one thing I forgot, the first 10 chapters of Genesis, I really like to encourage
Yeah,
people
they're important. The creation, how it all began, right?
right. And also where the problem started. Okay, sin started in
Mm.
chapter 2, 3. Yeah, in chapter 3, we had sin come into the earth, and Jesus is the answer to sin. So unless we know what the problem is, sometimes we don't understand what the answer is. So Jesus is the answer to the problem that started in Genesis. So it's really important. Those first 10 chapters or so kind of gives us a history of the background of everything here, and the early people, even
Mm.
Abram and all those are they're
But
all
how long into the to your walk with Christ should you start really checking out those 10 chapters? A year, 6 months?
oh, after after a few months you should read those 10 chapters.
Okay,
and
okay.
and then the letters are more to do with the fixing the church. Okay, so they kind of come after more years 2 and 3. They're how Paul and the others, they talk about how the what do we do for repair and maintenance on the church, and their time and their locational, like because the letter to the Corinthians tells the Corinthians that it's time to smarten up. The letter to the Hebrews tells them to lighten up. So the message isn't exactly the same. It's very correct, but the problems are different. So it can be confusing if we read them just at face value because we're not Corinthians or we're not the Hebrews. Our
Hmm.
problems aren't identical to that. So really often the answers still come back from the Gospels. Eventually, over time, we should read the book of Revelations, because that tells us it all ends well, and that's encouraging. And we know that a lot of strange things will happen in the end times. But we also read the early part of Revelation. We read the chapters about the early churches. They're 40 years old, and there's an evaluation for those churches, tells them how they're doing, gives us a sense as to where we should be. And then the last chapters are really interesting because the tree of life comes back again. We lose that in chapter 3 of Genesis. The last chapter, we get the tree of life back again. That's really beautiful. So it
Hmm.
all ends really well. And then the Old Testament. Yeah, that's a history book, and it's important. And I love the stories in there because all the heroes of the faith and how they walked with God and how God interacted with them. I think that's really beautiful and every one of them is different. And so when you think, well, there's kind of a cookie cutter program walking with God, but it's not. You and I, everybody, we all come from a different place, and we don't want to copy the next person. We want to learn from the next person, but God works differently with every one of us, and that
Hmm.
is so special. Like even Peter and Paul were different.
Yeah, one was for the Jewish people, another one was for the Gentiles or the non.
and then Peter was impulsive, and the John was a kind of a quiet. loving person. They were all different, but they're all very, very useful. So it doesn't matter what our nature is. What we do need is Jesus, and the answers are always coming back to that. Too often we see people struggling through the Old Testament, and that's always discouraging when I see people there, because they're struggling and they're confused. In the Old Testament, God told his people that they were to kill their enemies. In the New Testament, Jesus tells us to love our enemies. The message can be confusing because the Old Testament, God gave Moses instruction 1,500 years before Jesus, and that instruction, Jesus completed it, and we don't follow the teachings of Moses. They're not our instruction today. And that can be really confusing to people because they say, well, God doesn't change. God doesn't change, but Jesus completed the Old Testament. There's many covenants that God made with people. And then in the New Testament, we have a covenant, the completed covenant of Jesus with his people. And Jesus says, be obedient to all my teachings.
Mm-hmm.
And Matthew 5,
Matthew chapter 28, yeah.
Matthew 5, 6, and 7, we have the revised Old Testament,
Mm-hmm.
where we talk about how that Jesus says, do not murder. Well, it's more than not murdering. Do not commit adultery. It's more than that. It's showing respect for women and all this kind of stuff. It's a different concept. And so Jesus completed the Old Testament. So we want to be careful. We want to read it, but we want to read it as a history book. It's like us reading about English history. Well, a lot of our country's history is based on England, but it's still not it's not current events. But we have to understand how history works, because we realize that in that there is a relevance to it, because history does, in a sense, the people of Israel, they kept falling away from God, and we as Christians tend to drift away too, and we see what happens, and it gives us encouragement to not do that.
And I have one more question. So people who have been in the faith now for 5, 6, 7, 10 years, let's say, and I talk to them a lot because I love the Bible, and they say they do too, and I believe it. But every time I ask them, they're always in a different book besides the gospel. Do you think that we should spend most of our time, no matter how long we've been a Christian for, in the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John?
I would say a mature Christian should spend 50% of their time in the Gospels. That's my opinion. And then maybe 25, then 10% in Acts and whatever. And about 10% of their time should be in the Old Testament. And I've just been rereading the Old Testament myself for the first time in 20 years. I know it's a long, long time. And I find it really, really interesting how God worked with the people in those first 5 books with Moses and so on. Also realizing that Moses got direct contact with God, and that God dictated those books. The book of Genesis was all really dictated by God to Moses. That was fabulous. I never recognized that before.
There's definitely some good stuff in the whole Bible. Like I say to people, I'm a whole Bible type of guy, but we do need to use some wisdom and discernment to prioritize where we're going to be reading stuff that's the most relevant to us today. And Jesus is obviously the most relevant to us today. So why wouldn't we go to anywhere besides where Jesus is?
Absolutely, totally, because he is the only ladder to heaven. And if we're not on that ladder, doing anything else, we do need to, and then we need to spend some time reading about the last 1900 years. There were heroes of the faith too, and to recognize what they did, and that's good reading. But besides the Bible, it's good to read about them and to know how they used the Gospels and so on to find Jesus, and to understand our current history in terms of the since the New Testament. So it's but the focus is Jesus, and anything else will turn out disappointing.
Awesome. Thanks, Harry.
Thank you.